Afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Thursday, July the 7th, 2022. First up, farewell then, Boris Johnson. Here's a piece in The American Thinker by Monica Showalter. Boris Johnson resigns and sadly good riddance. Here are 5 reasons why. Like a pockmarked piece of rotten wood, UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson has seen his government collapse over a series of petty, stupid, self-inflicted scandals, and now he's going down with it. According to NBC News, scandal-ridden British Prime Minister Boris Johnson capitulated to mounting pressure to step down Thursday, announcing his decision after days of high-profile government resignations and calls from fellow Conservative Party members to quit. Johnson said in a speech outside Number 10, "In the past few weeks, I've been trying to convince my colleagues it would be eccentric to change governments when we have achieved so much. I regret not to be successful in those arguments, and of course, it's painful not to be able to see through those projects myself." Johnson also said he planned to remain as prime minister until a successor is chosen, a move that may face opposition from others in an increasingly hostile parliament. Showalter comments, "Obviously, it's a sign that the Christine O'Donnell rule holds, even in UK politics, that a party with a good plan still needs to have good candidates, and Johnson, though he was a known factor with his shambly disorderliness, engaged in a lot of petty dishonesties and hypocrisies similar to those of many Democrats, such as, say, Gavin Newsom of California, who's just been caught vacationing in Montana despite signing a law saying no state official is to travel there based on California's wokester objections to Montana's social policies, and who partied hardy in a maskless French laundry excursion with big pharma lobbyists during the days when he had the entire state on COVID lockdown. Johnson got caught doing that too, triggering a narrowly survived vote of confidence in the parliament for it recently. He also appointed a sex harasser he knew about to a high government post, and met a Russian intelligence-linked official off the books in Italy out of official channels to cite his most recent scandals. None of these scandals compare to the scale of scandal seen in Joe Biden, from, I won't read that, to the laptop from hell. Guys like Newsom survived these things with no repercussions. Johnson didn't. Little scandals like this are tinder when other factors are in play. Based on a back-of-the-envelope analysis, it seems that the real problem was that Johnson wasn't governing as a true Thatcherite conservative as the voters who had elected him had hoped he would. Well, I'm going to have to disagree with Monica Showalter here. Margaret Thatcher, despite her many good qualities, was never a conservative. She was a Manchester liberal. Back to Showalter, the top issue in Britain, as in the United States, is inflation, or as it's put in Britain, according to the UK press, the cost of living. Any plans to fix that? Apparently not. Issue 2 was Brexit. He's still futzing around on that, though he was better than his predecessor. Leave means leave. 3 is immigration. The migrants are still rolling in and claiming benefits, going to the top of the line for 5-star housing and other things denied ordinary Brits. No sane leader worth their salt would permit that kind of thing going on to please EU bureaucrats. There were other assorted bunglings, such as refusing to allow in Ukrainian refugees who had sponsors willing to house and feed them. Obviously something wasn't working. 4 was global warming. He just couldn't stop himself promoting that and shutting down Britain's viable energy, putting in place worthless greeny substitutes. Bad policies like that are not only not rooted in science, they are hell on consumers who must deal with higher costs and less reliable energy. To cling to that junk science was absolute poison for his government. 5 was COVID lockdowns, which were as badly managed and driven by quacks as the ones seen in America and in places like Colombia, where another conservative leader was recently thrown out. The whole thing was the mother of bad ideas, and unfortunately, conservatives pay for these things. And a word from Unheard from Sam Leith. Boris Johnson blames the herd. The PM's resignation speech smacked of butthurt. In a good mood, Boris Johnson likes to ramble, but his resignation speech as prime minister was just a few minutes long. On the surface, it made a creditable attempt to project dignity and generosity and good grace. He admitted that no one is remotely indispensable and called having been prime minister a privilege and an education. But you could discern three main things that, under its mostly mannerly style, it was determined to put across. In the first place, it was an attempt to present as case closed the notion that he should have been given his wish to continue as prime minister until the autumn. In the second, it was an attempt to shape how history would view him with a recitation of his achievements. And in the third, it was an attempt to cast him as the victim of malign or, at best, unimaginative pygmies. The three dovetailed nicely. Point one, because point two, therefore point three. The speech's big theme was, they were wrong and I was right. Johnson turned to the first issue right away, and his tactic was not to focus on the point as if it were a question up for debate, but rather to smuggle it into a subclause as if it were already a given. I've today appointed a cabinet to serve as I will until a new leader is in place. The important bit in that sentence is the three words, as I will. Why does he want to carry on? Not out of personal ambition, he assured us, but because of a selfless sense of duty. Quote, the reason I have fought so hard in the last few days to continue to deliver that mandate in person was not just because I wanted to do so, but because I felt it was my job, my duty, my obligation to you to continue to do what we promised in 2019, unquote. He bust out a nice little tricolon in making what rhetoricians call an ethos appeal. The issue of his place in history was addressed with a now familiar litany of catchphrases and statistics: getting Brexit done, delivering the fastest vaccine rollout in Europe, leading the West in standing up to Putin's aggression in Ukraine, vast program of investment in infrastructure, the biggest in a century, leveling up, unleashing the potential of every part of the United Kingdom, and so on. Nor was he slow to remind us of the electoral mandate that underpinned his arguments to be able to continue in post, the biggest conservative majority since 1987, the biggest share of the vote since 1979. That point informed a dominant figure of the speech, a apostrophe, a showy changing of your ostensible addressee. He vaunted his statesmanship in an aside, which showed how there were more important things than party politics. Let me say now to the people of Ukraine that I know that we in the UK will continue to back your fight for freedom as long as it lasts, taking credit by implication for the UK's support for Ukraine by reassuring them personally that it would survive his premiership. Otherwise, he more than once made a point of directing his address explicitly to you, the British public. The message was that he was speaking to the people over the heads of the parliamentary party. He was deft enough to admit that there will be many people who are relieved, but kept in mind quite a few who will also be disappointed, and it was the latter he affected to console. It wasn't, he said, that he hadn't tried to make his MPs make sense. I regret not to have been successful in those arguments. Eccentric, to give him his due, is a wonderfully effective note of condescension. His list of thanks might have seemed gracious, even formulaic, but be it noted that he thanked everyone, family, civil service, Conservative Party members and supporters, staff at Number 10, and checkers, except his parliamentary colleagues. And he even dropped in a salty little jibe about the Downing Street policemen being the one group, by the way, who never leak. And there's quite a bit of wriggle room in the way he phrased his pledge of support to his successor. To that new leader, I say, whoever he or she may be, I say, I will give you as much support as I can. He didn't quite say as much support as I feel like, but as oaths of fealty go, it means much the same thing. And so on to the third thing. Rumbling through these words like the proverbial golden thread woven through a tapestry was a distinct glittering line of what might informally be identified as butthurt. He admitted how sad I am to be giving up the best job in the world, but at no point would the departing prime minister concede there was any good reason for him to resign. He trivialized the criticisms of his character and behavior as if they were arbitrary gamesmanship on the cricket field. Quite a few months of pretty relentless sledging. Great men can put up with sledging, all part of the game, but the characters who surrounded him in the parliamentary party just didn't have the cojones. Them's the breaks. Stoical acceptance of his fate, or an attempt to recast reaping what you sow as the operation of dumb luck. The payoff was a metaphor so bland and unoriginal, so cursory, as to project not the slightest sincerity. Even if things sometimes seem dark, now our future together is golden. That's going through the motions. Leith concludes, Johnson, the phrase maker, was present not in the payoff, but in the payload. The main pull quote from today's resignation statement, that the herd instinct is powerful, casting his detractors in the parliamentary party not so much as independent moral agents, but stampeding quadrupeds. Here was a big dog, in his view of it, brought low by a flock of sheep. Let's go to Moon of Alabama for his take on this. Yesterday, I asked, will Johnson finally fall? Today, he did fall. In total, 51 officials had resigned up to that point. And yes, the Ukraine. But I doubt that we will see any change in the British backing of Ukraine Zelensky, as the pressure to do that comes from Washington, D.C. On February 28th, 5 days after the start of the war in Ukraine, I made a prediction. The final intent of this economic war is regime change in Russia. The likely consequence will be regime change in many other countries. Boris is only the first of many to fall over the steep price increases the West's sanctions on Russia have caused. And let's not forget the Assad curse, which can now count another entry on its already long casualty list. This is from Elizabeth Hay at the Daily Mail. You're a hero. Everybody loves you. Boris heaps praise on President Zelensky in heartfelt phone call minutes after being ousted. I guess we now take it for granted that political leaders don't even bother to hide that they owe more loyalty to foreigners than they do to their own people. Let's go to the chat. Hello to Chogoken666. Brits laugh as the toff is off. Bojo no mo. Hello to Dan, and Anran says, hello all. And to Boris, as Curly Bill said in Tombstone, bye. Brian Frakes, hello, good evening. I think it's a peculiar system in which a failed leader allows a failed leader to choose his successor. Hello to William Hicks, NG's He Stahl, Gamion J. Boss. Gamion says Boris could not bear KMG shaming. Well, as Peter Hitchens has pointed out many times, everything about Boris Johnson is phony, starting with his name. His Christian name is Alexander, and his friends have always called him Al. But no, he insisted on using the moniker Boris. I guess made him more exotic, perhaps. Hello to Aquachalongo and Anrun. Okay. Strategic Adapted Memeplex says it doesn't matter who occupies 10 Downing Street, the UK will continue along. Yes, apparently along with the so-called special relationship, which is where America says, how low can you go? And Britain says, sir, yes, sir. Jay Boss says, fastest vaccine are two words that sound suspicious in sequence. Yes, indeed, they do. Hello to Tarot Destroyer, who quotes Dr. Benjamin Rush. Unless we put medical freedom in the Constitution, the time will come when medicine will organize into an undercover dictatorship. Jay Boss says fast food bad, fast vaccine good. Anran says, I get inflation in the economy, but it was still disappointing in the poll Kevin read from yesterday that normies don't care at all about immigration and the ongoing invasion at our southern border. Well, there's a reason for that. Because who is championing immigration reform? People who champion immigration reform, people like Peter Brimelow, tend to get, silenced and then canceled. And we've known for years that people are increasingly wary of the things they admit to pollsters. The Soviet onion restaurant chain serving only onions in the Russian style, says Chogokin at 666. And hello, William Hicks says, Kevin, maybe the Brits should consider recommissioning the monarchy. The Queen is pretty tough, might last another 50 years. Hello to John S. And who's going to replace Boris? This is from the BBC. Some of the possible candidates. Oh, paper citizen Rishi Sunak, former Chancellor of the Exchequer. The brain-dead Liz, not Elizabeth, but Liz Truss, Foreign Secretary. Paper citizen Sajid Javid, former Health Secretary. Nadhim Zahawi, new Chancellor of the Exchequer. Jeremy Hunt, Member of Parliament who ran against Boris and lost. Suella Braverman, Attorney General. Penny Mordaunt, Secretary of State. Ben Wallace, Defense Secretary. Tom Tugendhat, Member of Parliament. Steve Baker, MP. Priti Patel, Home Secretary. Grant Shapps. Well, it seems that the Indian subcontinent has done a very good job of colonizing England. And Penny Mordaunt is a 5-1. It's a 5-1 apparently. And I like Penny Mordaunt. And I'll admit, frankly, it's because she is an attractive woman who appears to be, well, normal. According to Harriet Johnston for the Mail, from magician's assistant to daring dives in Splash, Penny Mordaunt will bring a dose of showbiz flair to the leadership race as she becomes one of the favorites to succeed Boris Johnson. From working as a magician's assistant to pay for a college education to training with Tom Daley for the diving reality TV show Splash, MP Penny Mordaunt has had quite the variety of jobs in her time. But now it seems the 49-year-old MP for Portsmouth North, who was once voted Britain's sexiest MP, is looking for her next role at the top. A Brexiteer who backed arch-Remainer Jeremy Hunt in the last leadership contest, Mordaunt is best known for appearing on a reality show called Splash, alongside B-list celebrities such as Gemma Collins from The Only Way is Essex. However, in recent years, she has attracted scores of admirers and made waves in 2019 as the UK's first female defense secretary, with her ambition showing earlier this year when she became the first MP to attack Boris over the Sue Gray report. That was over the illegal parties at 10 Downing Street. Despite Penny's polished looks and admirable achievements, she had a tough upbringing. Born in Torquay as one of twins, she moved with her family to Portsmouth at the age of 2. Named after a battleship, HMS Penelope, she grew up in Portsmouth where her father was a paratrooper before turning to teaching. What else do we have in her CV? Shortly after their mother died, her twin brother dropped out of school and went to work in a factory. Their dad worked all hours to pay the bills, battling his own cancer. Her mother died of cancer. Penny's younger brother was just 9 at the time, and she became the family carer. She paid her way through sixth form college by working as an assistant to a Portsmouth magician called Will Ayling, who was once president of the Magic Circle. They performed in hotels, army barracks, and golf clubs with Penny sawn in half and chopped to bits. Her boss's signature trick was called zigzag, where he pushed large steel blades through various body parts, giving the illusion that the assistant's stomach was taken out. Penny said, "I cut my leg a few times and got the odd nick under my chest, but no ambulances were required." By the time she passed her A-levels and got the house back to normal, her father had met a new partner, and Penny was able to start to really focus on her life. With typical endeavor, she then had a life-changing year working in Romanian orphanages. Then she studied philosophy at Reading University, where she embraced politics and was president of the Students' Union. It was then she helped to secure the acquittal of one of her university lecturers after he was falsely accused of indecently assaulting 2 students. The professor, John Cottingham, now emeritus professor of philosophy at Reading, had been accused of trying to seduce the pair by discussing bondage and the work of the Marquis de Sade during a garden party. He walked free from court after a 1997 trial in which Mordaunt, then 24, said she had no hesitation in coming forward to support the professor. She was director of communications for the National Lottery and head of campaigns for Diabetes UK. She then became head of foreign press for George W. Bush's 2000 and 2004 presidential election campaigns. Yes, and she joined the Royal Navy Reserve before standing as the Tory candidate for Portsmouth North in the 2005 general election. She narrowly lost to Labour. At the time, she received a letter from Margaret Thatcher, which told her to get back on the horse, which is still sitting on her mantelpiece. Penny did exactly that, and in 2010, won with an 8.6% swing. Lady Thatcher wrote again, this time to say, congratulations. Yes, as I say, I'm fond of Penny for a rather obvious reason. And how many other people are going to fall because of this supposed controlled demolition of our economies? Kian Bext has a story at thecountersignal.com. Could Justin Trudeau share the same fate as Boris Johnson? Now that UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson has resigned, many are asking if Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau will share the same fate. It has been a tumultuous last few months for Johnson, who has been repeatedly dogged by scandal after scandal while in power. There are many similarities between Johnson's predicament and Trudeau's current status in the House of Commons. Like Johnson, Trudeau has faced scandal after scandal, with the most recent incident involving RCMP Commissioner Brenda Lucki, who was accused of trying to interfere in the investigation of the Nova Scotia mass shooting. The scandal that seemed to be the final nail in the coffin for Johnson was his appointment of MP Chris Pincher, very satirical, as Deputy Chief Whip, despite knowing he was accused of groping two men. Not only has Trudeau himself been accused of groping a reporter in 2000, but his cabinet was also plagued with allegations that former Defense Minister Harjit Sajjan was aware of sexual misconduct allegations made against Chief Military Brass. Conservative MP and Deputy Shadow Minister Tako Fan Popta took to Twitter to argue that changes can be made to the government, citing Johnson's resignation. Others, including the advocacy group Canada Proud, asked Canadians whether they think Trudeau should be removed from office, like Johnson. Well, we don't really have much of a tradition in Canada of the powerful being held to account for their crimes. A woman who is in great trouble at her job is National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations, Roseanne Archibald. And Susan Delacourt moans at the Toronto Star. This is a story we've all seen before. As the Assembly of First Nations rejects a resolution calling for suspension of the National Chief, it is tempting to draw parallels between her story and that of the Green Party's enemy Paul as a warning parable. Oh, dear. This is how it goes. The old feminism used to insist that women were just as good as men, if not better. The new feminism insists that women must not be allowed to fail, you big meanies. Delacourt begins, it's not a summer rerun, but it's becoming a bizarrely familiar political story in Canada. A woman takes over a prominent Canadian political organization and almost immediately faces calls for her ouster amid allegations of a toxic workplace culture and internal mutiny from those loyal to the old guard. This summer, that's the story in the Assembly of First Nations, which voted on Tuesday to keep Chief Roseanne Archibald in power, but only after a messy public battle over her leadership. Last summer, it was the saga within the Green Party and the turmoil over Annamie Paul's leadership, who also stared down a no-confidence threat from her party. Well, Annamie Paul fell because of this ridiculous ranked ballot circus. That's how we choose leaders now. So you get a situation where a Conservative Party leader can be elected with mere 20% of the votes. And Annamie Paul was always a curious choice for the Green Party because the Green Party in Canada and elsewhere is ferociously anti-Jewish, and Annamie Paul is a Jew. If they hadn't had the ranked ballot system, there's no way that she would have been elected leader of the party. But no, according to the Toronto Star, that many will do just that. That is to say, draw parallels between Archibald and Paul, especially anyone who has binge watched the latest season of Borgen, the riveting Danish political TV series. The unavoidable conclusion of this fourth season, for those who haven't seen it, is that women better watch their backs when they have their top jobs. Not men, of course, because men are bulletproof, well, knife proof. You know, people never scheme against men in power. No, it's only women. It's only women who suffer this sad fate. And there is a good column by Chris Selly in the National Post. Patrick Brown is the inevitable product of broken leadership selection process. The days of caucus alone electing its leader are likely gone forever, but it should at least have a say. When the news of Patrick Brown's expulsion from the Conservative leadership race broke Tuesday evening, judging by social media posts, most everyone's minds logically went in the direction of membership fraud. Anything between buying memberships for genuinely interested people, which is illegal, to something far more complex and flamboyantly dodgy. Among the revelations after Brown was almost literally chased from the opposition leader's office at Queen's Park was that the Ontario Progressive Conservative membership list was a largely semi-fictional document, besides which it's pretty easy to commit low-level membership fraud, and even today, many party insiders laugh it off as par for the course. Yeah, and what they don't talk about is the racial element to this. It is typically racial minorities like the Sikhs. Amazingly, Canadian politics has been dominated by the Sikhs for a long time now, and Canadian politicians, such as Pierre Trudeau and Stephen Harper and Jason Kenney, they routinely campaign for votes in India. And that's not a scandal. As it happens, Sears writes, Brown is not accused of membership fraud. Rather, the unnamed leadership committee sources speaking to media mention allegedly compelling evidence that one or two more private companies might be paying Brown's campaign staff. Private company makes it sound worse than the usual hijinks. Depending on the private company in question, it might be very much worse. We got rid of corporate and union financing in federal politics, and you don't often hear anyone argue for going back. But it wasn't long ago that an entire industry, never mind just one company, decided the winner of this race. Andrew Scheer, yes, who got 20% of the vote, hardly even denied that Big Dairy bought him the leadership, farmers and their supporters having snapped up memberships en masse in a few key ridings. Indeed, he seemed to think it was funny. Remember his milk mustache at the press gallery dinner? Ho, ho, ho. Assuming each individual dairy voter bought their own membership, there was nothing remotely illegal or unethical about it. It's exactly the way the system is set up. A candidate promises something like, then sells you a membership on the understanding you'll vote for them. Indeed, I've seen several people on social media announce they purchased conservative memberships solely for the purpose of voting against Pierre Poilievre. No matter who wins the leadership, there's no way on earth they will be voting conservative in the next general election. That's not even novel, let alone disreputable. For decades, a few bucks bought you membership in the Alberta Progressive Conservatives and essentially allowed non-Tories to vote for the next premier. The question no one has been able to answer for me is why the hell would anyone with a party's long-term welfare in mind want anything to do with this arrangement? Who is the system for other than the hyper-ambitious individuals it might benefit? It's certainly not for caucus, which once upon a time elected its own leader, but is now stuck with whomever the membership coalesces behind, no matter what the reason. It's for the members, supporters say. Gotta water the grassroots. Not really. Caucus is only stuck with an unpopular leader until they engineer that leader's ouster, which requires no consultation with the grassroots at all. Brown might be the ultimate example of a leader not respecting the membership, having courted social conservatives and towed the anti-carbon tax line throughout his leadership campaign for the Ontario Tories. He threw them out of the bus and over a bridge once elected. Aaron, True Blue O'Toole, executed a similar maneuver at the federal level. And if Poilievre carries the day in September, I suspect we will see something similar. Having thrown his weight behind the Freedom Convoy in a bid to win the leadership, to the dismay of many even in his own party and disgust of many outside it, the smart money is on him backing away slowly once he's trying to win the prime minister's office. That sure sounds like a net negative to me. Brown's campaign framed the issue rather brilliantly, if inadvertently, in its Tuesday night rebuttal to his disqualification, This decision has disenfranchised over 100,000 Canadians that chose to join the party. Nope. They can still vote for the next Conservative Party of leader. They just won't be able to vote for the guy who signed them up. If that disenfranchises them, if they're no longer interested in voting at all for the leader, never mind in a general election, then what good were those members to the party in the first place? Well, Canada has a deformed parliamentary system. First of all, the caucus used to elect the leader because the leader of the party or the prime minister is supposed to be primus inter pares, first among equals. Instead, the prime ministership has become a dictatorship. The parliamentary system is supposed to prevent the concentration of power in one man's hands, but instead the Prime Minister of Canada, even in a minority government, has far more power than any president of the United States. And it used to be that the MPs selected the leader, but now the leader of the party selects the caucus. Before anyone can run in a federal election for any party, the leader of the party has to sign off an official document that's sent to Elections Canada, which means that the party can say, oh, well, your constituents apparently want you to run for the party, but I don't, so you don't get to. And it's become increasingly non-rare that party officials say, no, you're not even going to be allowed to run for the nomination because we don't like you. Why? We don't have to say. We just don't like you. So we're not going to let you run. It's a very strange system that we have in Canada. Another example of this is that any flunky in the Prime Minister's office has more power than most MPs, well, than all MPs, and most cabinet ministers. But that's not the big problem in my country. The big problem is the extreme right. Here's Global News, or the CSIS News Network's Rachel Gilmore. How close is too close to the far right? Why some experts are worried about Canada's MPs. On June the 30th, Conservative leadership candidate Pierre Poilievre made a choice. Wearing a crisp blue suit and a politician's smile, he walked up to a group of anti-vaccine mandate protesters and led the pack as it walked down Ottawa's streets. Behind him marched a man named James Topp, an anti-vaccine figure now set to face a court-martial, who had been walking across the country to draw attention to his opposition to vaccine mandates. Topp, however, had recently joined a podcast run by far-right figurehead. I don't think that this woman, Rachel Gilmore, knows what figurehead means. Jeremy McKenzie, for over an hour, saying that the podcast and others like it kept him hanging on. McKenzie said in January that the Freedom Convoy, which gathered in Ottawa in February, could bring down the government. It's unclear why Poilievre felt that he needed to meet with Topp, said Stephanie Carvin, a former CSIS analyst who now teaches at Carleton University. But it was definitely a choice with consequences, she said, including potentially emboldening and legitimizing the more extreme views among the convoy's supporters. Politicians around the world have increasingly toyed with far-right movements and principles in recent years, from spreading unfounded conspiracies about the World Economic Forum. Oh, the World Economic Forum, that's a nothing organization. It is in no way influential. Why are so many prominent politicians formally affiliated with the WEF then? Why is it that every year the most prominent men and women in the world make a pilgrimage to the WEF's confab in Davos, Switzerland? Oh, and they're also guilty of amplifying populist ideas from the fringes of society for political gain. You know, unlike the radical center of Canadian politics, which cheers the sexual mutilation of children and has made it a crime for anyone, including parents, to counsel against this. But as this tactic becomes increasingly popular, experts are starting to worry about the influence politicians could have in legitimizing extreme ideas. They seem to be playing this culture war knowingly, said Evan Balgord, executive director of the Canadian Anti-Hate Network, in an interview with Global News. Yes, the Canadian Anti-Hate Network, which is an AstroTurf organization funded by, wait for it, the government of Canada. This is the same organization that says the red ensign, Canada's flag until 1965, is a hate symbol. And that children, in a booklet they prepared, which is going to be given to Canadian school children, that students should be wary of anyone who talks about free speech. That's what counts as extremism in Canada, free speech. Because as we have been told, freedom is not one of Canada's core values. Apparently, the most crucial of Canada's core values is supporting the Liberal Party of Canada, whose logo happens to be exactly the same as Canada's flag. Wow, what a coincidence. Just like the flag of India is the symbol of the Congress Party. Oh, more extremism from Europe. This is from Kane at Citizen Free Press. It's a series of tweets. First, Kian Bext. Polish farmers are rising up. This is growing into a global movement. From Radio Geneva, Italian farmers also rise up. We are not slaves. We are farmers. We cannot make ends meet. Then a warning to politicians, let's come to Rome. The unjustified and nefarious increase in raw materials and basic necessities have brought the agricultural sector to its knees. From the same source, citizens and truckers support Dutch farmers' protest by slowing traffic and blocking roads and highways in many parts of the country. The majority of the Dutch support the farmers' protest. German and Dutch farmers block the Esch-Herenberg roundabout on the frontier between Holland and Germany. Populism. Populism is very, very bad, of course, except when political leaders talk about the people and how much they love the people. They love the people, but certainly not any ideas which might arise from the people. I'm looking at the chat again, and someone had made a reference to sending me a direct message, and I get a lot of direct messages, and sometimes I inadvertently don't see all of them. I wonder if you would be so kind as to send that DM again. Tarot Destroyer says we need the private sector to create jobs. If the government could create jobs, communism would have worked, but it didn't. That's from Tim Scott. William Henry Pratt adopted the stage name Boris Karloff, says Tarot Destroyer. Indeed, he was a fine actor. He hosted an anthology show rather similar to Alfred Hitchcock's Presents, called Thriller, which is really quite good. And you can find that on DVD. Hello to Palcasso 88 and Pete Bauman. And who else do we have? There is actually a Yogi Bear honey fried chicken chain that was purchased by Arby's, says Chokakin 666. Okay. Who else do we have here? Brian Frake says, I'm aware of a campground called Yogi Bear's Jellystone Park. I used to watch Yogi Bear when I was a child. And again, back in those days, you didn't watch things on TV because they were good. You watched them because they were on TV. The Flintstones, Yogi Bear and the Flintstones and every other Hanna-Barbera cartoon I've ever seen, they weren't funny. Not a little bit funny. And of course, the animation was the dregs. Hello to Hauper. Chokin says, 666 says, Jimmy Kahn, R.I.P. Oh, okay. Quachalango says, on Twitter, I just learned about Mrs. Jellaby, I believe, who is the kind of woman who is preoccupied with starving children in Africa while ignoring the starving children in her midst. Yes, that's from Dickens. As an addendum to yesterday, I will say that Fincher's use of Donovan's hurdy-gurdy man was spot on, and Brian Cox was wonderful as Melvin Belli. That's from Anron. Brian Cox is good in everything, says Palpcasso 88. Indeed, he is. I very much preferred him as Hannibal Lecter to that Welshman's overacting. And anybody seen Nightcrawler? Asked Halper. I have not. Cox was so creepy and amusing in Rob Roy, says Anne Run. And let's see if we have someone new here. Smells like vanilla lasts forever, says Chogakin 666. So that was one of the most disappointing experiences of my childhood, that I just loved the smell of vanilla, and it was kept on a shelf, above the counter. And I thought, if vanilla smells that good, just imagine how delicious it actually tastes. So I climbed up onto the counter and then stood up and opened the door and got the bottle, twisted the top off, and glug, glug. Oh my God, I've just been poisoned. Cox wasn't good in Nicholas and Alexander as Trotsky, says Anron, but that really wasn't his fault. Let's see. Who else? Kevin hated Bojo from the start, says Halper. Yes, I did. Just a phony and a creep. And as I mentioned last week, I wonder how many women he bullied into having abortions. Penelope Wyatt, we know of one for certain. Hello to Dionysus. And it's Bleak House, not hard times, says Chokin 666. Georgia Guidestones were demolished today. I'll have something to say about that later. Gamian says, like coffee, incredible smell, tolerable taste at best. Yes. The smell of brewing coffee from when I was a child, I thought it was so delicious. I never drank it. That was supposed to be an adult drink at the time. I grew up drinking tea. I grew up in kind of a British household. I tried coffee in my 20s, and I discovered that it doesn't agree with me, that it wants out of me in a real hurry. Other thing, kippers, the fish that Brits like to eat, or perhaps used to. And kippers smell so delicious when they're being fried, but the taste is a big disappointment. Jay Boss says that is also how many people take up pipe smoking and become disappointed because it doesn't taste as nice as it smells. And now I'm going to talk about, the Ukraine. This is from the Associated Press. With Russia's military action in Ukraine in its fifth month, Russian President Vladimir Putin Thursday warned Kyiv that it should quickly accept Moscow's terms or brace for the worst, adding ominously that Russia has barely started its action. Speaking at a meeting with leaders of the Kremlin-controlled parliament, Putin accused Western allies of fueling the hostilities, charging that the West wants to fight us until the last Ukrainian. It's a tragedy for the Ukrainian people, but it looks like it's heading in that direction. Everybody should know that, largely speaking, we haven't even yet started anything in earnest, Putin said, AP says, in a menacing note. He declared that Russia remains ready to sit down for talks to end the fighting, adding that those who refuse to do so should know that the longer it lasts, the more difficult it will be for them to make a deal with us. We are hearing that they want to defeat us on the battlefield, Putin said. Let them try. Weren't we assured by experts months ago that Putin would be gone by now, if not weeks ago, because his position in Russia was so weak and Russia was reeling from the sanctions? I'm just getting the impression that today everything that the experts say is untrue or just an outright lie. Everything. I mean, whenever I see that in a story, experts say, I think, well, now I need to take the opposite side in this. One of the contenders to replace Boris Johnson is Defense Minister Ben Wallace. And he said that Allied troops stormed the beaches of Normandy so that Black lives would matter. These are the kind of clowns who tend to, dominate conservative parties all around the world, so that Black lives matter. And somehow he did not immediately die of shame after this. Let's talk about greatness and what that means today. And this is a piece by Victor Davis Hanson in AmericanMind.org called The Great Regression. And it's illustrated with a picture of Klaus Schwab, the founder and head of the World Economic Forum, yucking it up on stage with no less than John Kerry, former senator, former secretary of state. Now he's climate czar in the Biden administration, because the WEF, they had no power, no influence. Only a conspiratorialist could believe that. The following is an excerpt from Michael Walsh's forthcoming book, Against the Great Reset, 18 Theses Contra the New World Order, which will be published by Bombardier Books and available October 18th, 2022. Part 1, The Problem. The Great Reset was first concocted at the World Economic Forum in Davos by its founder, Klaus Schwab, as a way to assemble together global success stories like himself. His idea, apparently, was that grandees who have done well for themselves could do even better for the rest of us if these anointed could just be unbound and given enough power and authority to craft rules for nearly 8 billion of the planet's ignorant. A word of caution is needed about the pretentious and supposedly benign signature title of the Great Reset Project. Assume the worst when the adjective great appears in connection with envisioned fundamental government-driven or global political changes. What was similar between Lyndon Johnson's massively expensive but failed Great Society and Mao Zedong's genocidal Great Leap Forward was the idea of a top-down, centrally planned schema cooked up by elites without any first-hand knowledge or even worry about how it would affect the middle classes and poor. So often, the adjective great is a code word of supposed enlightened planners for radical attempts at reconstruction of a society that must be either misled or forced to accept a complete overhaul. When great is applied to a proposed transnational comprehensive revolution, we should also equate it with near religious zealotry. The Great Reset, after all, in all its green and woke glory, with all its credentialed and expert devotees, is still a faith-based rather than scientific effort. Its spiritual predecessor was perhaps the 18th century Great Awakening of Protestant evangelicalism that swept the eastern seaboard of colonial America in reaction to the secularism of the Enlightenment. But this time around, the frenzy is fueled more by agnostics who worship secular progressive totems, such as Al Gore or Greta Thunberg. Given the Davos elite's cosmic ambitions, great also conjures up a messianic reference to God's great plan that should from now on high reorder earthly life under a few trusted religious authorities. It recalls the notion of Alexander the Great of a brotherhood of man, which supposedly was to fuse conquered peoples into one vast and enlightened East-West Persian Hellenistic Empire, albeit after rather than before Eastern tribes were conquered and sometimes slaughtered in efforts to achieve a common, centrally planned purpose. Hansen continues, to reassure a shared, brighter post-COVID-19 path ahead, Schwab drops most of the familiar globalist names that resonate: power, money, seriousness, and wisdom. And the great resetters are now quite familiar. The world's third or fourth richest man, Bill Gates, coming off his denials of palling around with the late Jeffrey Epstein; Jack Ma, the Chinese multi-billionaire and Alibaba CEO, apparently now forcibly disappeared by the Chinese Communist government for too many candid speeches; the septuagenarian Prince Charles, whose long-anticipated monumental accomplishments apparently must still await in his ascension to the British throne; the polymath, Dr. Anthony Fauci, who has laced his 2020 Nobel Lie assessments of wearing and not wearing masks, or achieving and not achieving herd immunity in terms of climate change, race, Chinese cooperation, and global progressive expertise. John Kerry, one of the multilateralist architects of the Paris Climate Accord and Iran deal, and the usual rotating leaders of the UN, IMF, World Bank, and the European Central Bank. In its post-COVID-19 global comprehensiveness, the Great Reset has ambitions to be our greatest woke project ever. On examination, it is a kitchen sink mishmash of agendas that incorporate the UN's long-stale Sustainable Development Plan, Agenda 21, the Green New Deal, tidbits of Black Lives Matter sloganeering, critical race theory, stakeholder capitalism that often champions ESG, or forced corporate embrace of environmental and social governance over shareholder profitability, open borders rhetoric, and boutique redistributionism dumbed down from Thomas Piketty's Capital in the 21st Century. Reset offers us a global Fabian socialist future repackaged as a European Union-like top-down diktat. But above all, the agenda incorporates the pop insights of various half-educated corporate billionaires. All now find themselves in a secure enough position to dabble with Trotskyite ideas, to be foisted upon others not so fortunate, and lacking their own exemptions from the toxicity of the elite's theories. The same linguistic suspicions hold true of the use of the noun reset. It assumes a year zero arrogance that all that came before was flawed, and all that will follow, we assured, will not be so defective. Such absolutism is reminiscent of former President Barack Obama's grandiose promise on the very eve of the 2008 election: we are 5 days away from fundamentally transforming the United States of America. A transformation that birthed the Tea Party revolt just 2 years later during the 2010 midterm elections, one of the greatest conservative political pushbacks of the past 70 years. We remember that just 4 months after Obama's promises of transformation, the romance of fundamental change went international with the idea of a foreign policy reset that focused on a new détente with Vladimir Putin. The reactive makeover that followed from the Obama-Clinton reset was unfortunately an utter failure. Its pompous declarations, talk of listening and outreach, ended in fresh Russian aggressiveness. Well, Hanson and I will have to agree to disagree about that. The telltale noun revolution, of course, also makes its appearance frequently in Great Reset rhetoric, specifically in connection to Klaus Schwab's 2017 best-selling book, The Fourth Industrial Revolution. In it, Schwab makes the now familiar argument that the internet, computers, electronic communications, artificial intelligence, and the new global interconnectedness of the prior third revolution have at last synchronized into wonderful harmony. The supposedly never before seen, never imagined fusion of the paradigms of economic, social, cultural, and political life offers us a once-in-a-lifetime, or rather last chance, to exploit them, even if most of us are not sufficiently equipped to appreciate the opportunity. Yet Schwab makes the fundamental error that these new technologies act as independent drivers of the way people behave and think, rather than accelerants that nonetheless have not changed ancient, fixed, and predictable human behavior. In Schwab's way of thinking, imagine that a modern computerized high-tech pump sends forth 2,000 gallons of water a minute, and therefore its essence, water, is now likewise new and different from what emerged for millennia at the rate of a gallon a minute from pre-industrial hand pumps. Again, we fools outside the Davos agenda would apparently mistakenly believe that greater volume had not much altered from antiquity water's molecular structure, chemical properties, and use in the natural world. A glimpse of the idea that Davos-like elites can gather to discuss reset planning in an age of paradigm-changing technology is popular at the national level. A good example is the invitation-only conference on entertainment, technology, finance, and communications held each summer in Idaho at the Sun Valley Resort, hosted by the investment bank of Allen and Company. In 2021, the usual corporate and media globalist suspects showed up, among them Facebook's CEO Mark Zuckerberg, Amazon founder Jeff Bezos, Apple CEO Tim Cook, Microsoft co-founder Bill Gates, Netflix co-CEO Reed Hastings, Viacom CBS, now Paramount chairwoman Sherry Redstone, Disney chairman Robert Iger, New York City's former mayor Michael Bloomberg, GM CEO Mary Barra, Warner Media CEO Jason Kilar, Discovery CEO David Zaslav, CNN anchor Anderson Cooper, and film and television producer Brian Grazer. The premise was Platonic, a meritocracy chosen by the metrics of either acquired or inherited wealth, influence, celebrity, or a corporation's ability to influence millions, immune from private bias and guided by reason, should be given latitude to override the dangerous emotions of the masses. And Hansen concludes, so there are plenty of linguistic reasons alone to be suspicious of the grandiose notion of a top-down, international, and fundamental transformation of the way the world is supposed to work. Well, the word, I'd say that the word reset is especially sinister in this regard. We're going to take an existing world economy, which is based on fossil fuels, and we're going to turn it off. And then we're going to flip the switch, and miraculously, a tremendous green, clean economy will appear. I mean, it doesn't make any sense, and it's never made any sense. Well, let's talk about tyranny. This is from Mackenzie Gray at CTV News and Annie Bergeron Oliver. The federal government, that's the Canadian federal government, has no intention of dropping the controversial ArriveCan app because it gives the Public Health Agency of Canada key health information about travelers who test positive for COVID-19 through testing at airports and land borders. PHAC uses data that travelers enter in the ArriveCan app to identify the vaccination status and destinations of people who test positive as a part of the mandatory random testing program at Canada's borders. Since provinces are no longer collecting significant data from PCR tests done at the local and provincial level, senior government sources describe the data gained from the ArriveCan app as the last line of COVID defense in Canada. Strangely enough, all these Afghan refugees that we're taking in don't have to be vaccinated. PHAC said the selection process for who gets tested at a border crossing is determined by a computer algorithm that selects a representative sample of fully vaccinated travelers based on statistical parameters. Ooh, sounds complicated. Those statistical parameters set by PHAC are based in part on global epidemiology trends, which a senior government source admits can make travelers coming to Canada from countries that have a low vaccination rate or experiencing an outbreak more likely to be flagged for mandatory random testing. PHAC believes border testing and information gained from the ArriveCan app make the agency better prepared for possible future waves. Dr. Isaac Bogach, I'm familiar with this fellow. He is one of the most panicked man in Canada. He's been screaming, we're all going to die or something close to it for 2 years now. And yet he still remains an infectious disease expert with Toronto's University Health Network, believes that detailed data gained through the ArriveCan app can help PHAC if the information is being used properly. Ooh, yeah. Farewell to privacy in Canada. But of course, the World Economic Forum has assured us that by the year 2030, no one will own anything, no one will have any privacy, and will be happy. This is from a site called Need to Know News. Airlines across the West have fallen into chaos at the same time. Here's the agenda. Airlines are failing across Europe, the United States, and Australia with delayed and canceled flights all at the same time. The airlines are blaming bad weather, shortage of pilots due to layoffs and early retirements, an unexpected increase in travelers, fuel shortages, and the pandemic. This video provides evidence that the chaos is manufactured and the solution will be a digital passport. And this video by Hugo Talks talks about this digital passport, which, guess what? It's going to be made mandatory worldwide. And he begins by talking about this chaos. For instance, apparently baggage handlers have forgotten how to handle baggage. And this is going on not just in the UK, but in Ireland, the USA, Australia, Germany, all over the place, all at the same time. All we have to do is look through the headlines today travel chaos, extreme weather, and school holidays cause long delays at Sydney Airport, etc. Because school holidays don't happen every year. Americans hoping for European vacations this summer should prepare for one thing: chaos. That's from CNBC. Europe becomes the epicenter for this summer's travel chaos. That's from Bloomberg. Yes, this repeated use of this word. There's a story about it at Heathrow or wherever every single day. This is not naturally occurring. You think this would happen all of a sudden at all of these airports, all at the same time? Oh, it's because it's the summer. We're so busy. Oh, it's because we laid off so many people. Oh, it's because of the pandemic. It's because we're short of fuel. Baggage handlers have forgotten to do their jobs, you know. It's all hogwash. All of these countries and airports are all in lockstep with one another. It's all manufactured. It's all orchestrated. And as he has said before, it's the problem, reaction, solution. You manufacture the problem, then you amplify, exaggerate the reaction in the media, then you give them the solution. And it will probably be a digital passport, a monitoring device, a social credit app that they will bring in and say, oh, look, this is what you need. This is what is needed to stop all of these queues, to speed up the waiting times, to bring you a better customer service, when really it's all about coercing you into the digital trap. You know, quite a few times, and this is it here, unlocking the potential of digital identity for secure and seamless travels. This is something called KTDI. And guess who's behind KTDI? Why, that would be the World Economic Forum, which is an organization, as we all know, has no power and no influence. You know who is second on the list of sponsors of KTDI? Why, that would be the government of Canada. What a coincidence. What a coincidence. And we have the government of the Netherlands. Is there anything interesting going on in the Netherlands these days? The author of this video speculates that soon you will not be able to buy anything without the use of this digital ID. Oh, which is going to totally protect your privacy, because they would never share this information with, say, governments, despite the fact that, you know, the Canadian government is one of the powers behind this. And you will be given a score for your interactions with various businesses, starting with airports. And if your score falls below a certain threshold, then you will be refused service. And of course, this is part of what's included in this plan is banning the use of cash. Oh, yes, this prevents money laundering. Oh, I see. Me spending $80 on grocery shopping is somehow part of money laundering. I mean, that just went down so easily. Oh, all transactions over a certain ridiculously low level have to be reported to the government, because the government needs to know what you are spending and when. Apparently, it's absolutely essential. And this is just a reminder. This is something I talked about a while back. This is from Anthony Murdoch at LifeSite News. Canada's top police force admits using spyware to hack into suspects' phones without their knowledge. Canada's national RCMP force has acknowledged that it uses special spyware to hack into a suspect's phone without them even knowing it. According to a Politico report published last week, the RCMP uses spyware to turn on or off the camera or microphone of a laptop or phone at will to eavesdrop on one's own conversations. Well, the RCMP says it only uses such techniques in serious matters involving national security when all other means have been exhausted. The revelation nevertheless shows that it has been used in at least 10 investigations between 2018 and 2022. According to a senior research associate at the University of Toronto Citizen Lab, the ability to hack into one's phone in such a manner has been kept incredibly quiet. This is a remarkable finding, and for the first time publicly reveals that the RCMP is using spyware to infiltrate mobile devices. The new methods are needed as a result of so-called end-to-end encrypted apps, which make it virtually impossible to hack, said the RCMP. I don't recall Canada's Parliament being consulted about this. And of course, Canadian government was spying on anyone with a smartphone during the Corona doom. Oh, we were just tracking where people were going. Oh, and it was totally anonymized. Oh, no, and we would never, find out the names of people who were doing this. No, no, no. Because the governments never do anything like that. And only a conspiratorial thinker would believe that. There's a story here from Deborah Heine at American Greatness. A large portion of the infamous Georgia Guidestones monument was destroyed early Wednesday when an explosive device detonated, according to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. The blast was captured by closed-circuit TV. The Elbert County Sheriff's Office is also investigating the explosion, and a bomb squad was called to the scene. Update: the entire structure has now been demolished for safety reasons, according to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. The blast comes a week after Georgia's gubernatorial primary, where third-place Republican candidate Candace Taylor said the Guidestones were satanic and that she would make demolishing them part of her platform. The mysterious monument, also known as America's Stonehenge, was reportedly unveiled in northeastern Elbert County on March the 22nd, 1980, before an audience of 100 to 400 people. A man using the pseudonym Robert C. Christian commissioned the structure in June 1979 on behalf of a small group of loyal Americans. Christian said the 19-foot-high monument would function as a compass, calendar, and clock, and should be capable of withstanding catastrophic events. The Guidestones also serve as an astronomical calendar, and every day at noon, the sun shines through a narrow hole in the structure and illuminates the day's date on an engraving, the tourism website says, adding that the structure is mysterious in origin, for no one knows the identity of a group of sponsors who provided its specifications. The stones were engraved with 10 guidelines for humanity in 8 languages: English, Spanish, Swahili, Hindi, Hebrew, Arabic, Chinese, and Russian. It begins with a chilling message espousing extreme population control. Maintain humanity under 500 million in perpetual balance with nature. Guide reproduction wisely, improving fitness and diversity. Unite humanity with a living new language. Rule passion, faith, tradition, and all things with tempered reason. Protect people and nations with fair laws and just courts. Let all nations rule internally, resolving external disputes in a world court. Avoid petty laws and useless officials. Balance personal rights with social duties. Prize truth, beauty, love, seeking harmony with the infinite. Be not a cancer on the earth. Leave room for nature. Leave room for nature. The world's population in 1980 was 4.43 billion. It is now almost 8 billion. To maintain humanity under 500 million, we'd have to eliminate about 90% of the current world's population. The Guidestones have always been controversial, with detractors labeling them as satanic and the 10 commandments of the Antichrist. This fellow who supposedly was responsible has an interesting name. Let's bring it up again here. RC Christian. And of course, people have said that the RC stands for Rosicrucian, which is a weirdo religious cult, which Rosicrucian after the Rosy Cross, which goes back, to medieval times. I once had a friend in school whose father was a religious kook, and he had a library, a working office, as it were. It was filled with hundreds of books, most of them on the subjects of Rosicrucianism and Swedenborgism. And I used to shudder. I'd pick up one of these books, open it up. I don't want to go back in here again. So let's talk about girl boss This is from Pedro Gonzalez at Compact Why Bosses Love #GirlBoss. The Nights of Rage commenced almost as soon as the U.S. Supreme Court struck down Roe v. Wade and returned the abortion question to the states. In New York, protesters gathered before St. Patrick's Cathedral. Repeatedly in Arizona, they assailed the state Senate building, pounding on and damaging its doors. Yet clarity emerged amid the acrid clouds of tear gas launched by police trying to disperse the protesters. For the only thing that erupted faster than the street gatherings were pledges by big business, from J.P. Morgan Chase to Dick's Sporting Goods, Goldman Sachs to Disney, to facilitate and subsidize abortions for employees and their dependents, travel included. Why are America's largest firms so dedicated to maximizing abortion access? The answer is obvious, if misanthropic. Family commitments are an inconvenience to corporations because they impede bigger bottom lines. Motherhood, especially, is an obstacle to productivity. In other words, modern feminism and managerial capitalism march hand in hand against the family. Of course, that cuts against the narratives of both the right and the left in the United States. The Republican Party is ideologically wedded to the interests of big business, which it casts as compatible with so-called family values. The Democrats, meanwhile, glorify a particular mode of girl boss feminism as both counterculture and revolutionary force. Materialist analysis sees through both. In the Communist Manifesto, Marx and Engels argued that modern industry shredded traditional family ties, that the ruling class has torn away from the family its sentimental veil, and has reduced the family relation to a mere money relation. The family went from being the fundamental unit around which society was organized to becoming an incubation center for new workers who are subject to cost-benefit analysis before they draw their first breath. Following Marx, the Russian theorist and revolutionary Alexandra Kollontai noted how capitalist integration of women into the workforce severely eroded traditional family structures. Writing in 1920, she asked, "What kind of family life can there be if the wife and mother is out at work for at least 8 hours and counting the traveling is away from home for 10 hours a day? Her home is neglected, the children grow up without any maternal care, spending most of the time out on the streets exposed to all the dangers of this environment. The woman who is wife, mother, and worker has to expend every ounce of energy to fulfill these roles," unquote. Or she can get an abortion and dedicate herself exclusively to the role of worker, which is what Roe's defenders argued in the euphemistic language describing abortion as a source of economic empowerment for women. Yet that empowerment hasn't corresponded with increased female happiness. A study published in 2009 found an inverse relationship between the progress of the gender equality movement and American women's happiness since the 1970s. By the 1990s, women were more likely than men to report unhappiness. By contrast, women in the 1970s were more likely than men to report being very happy. This runs counter to conventional thinking, but liberation comes at a high cost. In 1996, the Brookings Institution found that liberalized abortion and contraception gave rise to a hookup culture that undermined the ability of women to condition sex on the promise of marriage in the event of a pregnancy. Put another way, the sexual revolution took power away from women and encouraged men to engage in non-committal behavior. These women feared correctly that if they refused sexual relations, they risked losing their partners, the Brookings study found. Sexual activity without commitment was increasingly expected in premarital relationships. A co-author of that study was Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, among Roe's most vociferous defenders. And Gonzalez concludes, no group has done more in our time to encourage abortion and discourage family formation than the managers of U.S. capitalism. Far from advancing in the hands of Marxists, the feminism that emerged in modern America was defined by an entrepreneurial spirit, convinced that technology and the market system could free women, not only from the constraints of tradition, but also from biology itself. It succeeded in liberating women from the crib side and chaining her to the cubicle. This is from a new magazine, a radical magazine called Compact, which is behind a paywall, but occasionally some articles, such as the one I just read, are printed in full for all to see. Let's go back to the chat. I might watch the movie Kevin likes with those red shoes tonight, says Oscar Toe. That's a beautiful, beautiful movie, and certainly the best movie ever made about art. Someone heard seagulls. Well, I'm within like what, a 3-minute walk from the ocean here. So yes, there are an awful lot of seagulls. They are belligerent and numerous. Someone suggested I should feed them on live stream. No, you don't want to make seagulls habituated to feeding from people. Or The Wizard of Oz. No, I do not like The Wizard of Oz, Anrun. It's an atheist allegory. National Review put it on its list of best conservative movies, and I thought, you people are idiots about culture. It rails against the very idea of heaven. That's what Oz is. But there's no one behind the curtain. There's no God, and we should be happy that there is no God. Last night, I watched a movie by Michael Ritchie. I rewatched a movie from 1975 directed by Michael Ritchie called Smile, which is about a small town, Santa Rosa, California, a beauty pageant. It's a very funny movie. It's also a very sad movie and quite profound as well. You know, Bruce Dern is the star, and he's great as always. And Nicholas Pryor, who I've liked him in everything I've seen him. He is just outstanding as playing the world's saddest man. And it's got Agent 99, Barbara Feldon from Get Smart, in the role of the former or previous contest winner who is now in charge of the pageant. And it takes over her life with unfortunate consequences. Johnny Appleseed was a Swedenborgian missionary, says Yo Mama. How about that? Maybe means RC Cola, says Quachulango. Okay. I guess the maker didn't design the structure to withstand explosives. Whoops, says Geez, he stall. Yo Mama says nobody knows who created it. Nobody knows who destroyed it. America. Okay. Ruslan Akhmatov, who's back, says America combines high-tech brutality and ugliness in one package. Brian Frakes jokes, your tractor assaulted my bullets. Quachulango says, one thing I really hate is being treated worse as a returning American citizen than a foreign tourist / immigrants. Ruslan Akhmatov recommends the Tunisian-Iranian film Bab Aziz, a beautiful meditation about life and death. Okay. Who else? Yeah, interesting thing about, a lot of people were surprised when Christopher Hitchens turned out to be such a big booster of George W. Bush. Well, the reason for that is that Christopher Hitchens was a communist. And communist theory teaches that that societies must go through stages. And one of them is the capitalist stage, which gives birth to a proletarian class. And so George W. Bush bombing all these countries in order to force American-style liberal democracy, liberal democratic capitalism on them was praiseworthy. Eventually, the proletarians would rise and there'd be a communist revolution. Of course, that's not what happened in Russia, because it was a very small industrial proletariat at the time of both the 1905 and 1917 revolutions, and there was a vast number of peasants. And so the communists turned themselves inside out, trying to explain how this could have happened. And of course, Stalin took the view that agriculture must be collectivized and the kulaks liquidated as a class in order to build up funds for the industrialization of Russia. Therefore, we can reverse engineer this. And he got away with it. He got away with it. Enron says, I love me some Greek salad. Those olives and cucumbers work well together. Sing Edelweiss for us, Chogo King. 666S and run. Okay. Chogo King 666 had a Greek spinach pie. I used to drink five giant mugs per day. What was that? Coffee? Coffee in the morning, tea in the afternoon, says Ruslan Akhbatov. I drink a lot of tea. I don't drink water. I drink tea instead. It's a mild euphoriant. It concentrates intelligence and makes you smarter. So it's a good thing. And I take it clean. No sugar, no milk. Those are useless calories, which deform the taste of the tea. Yo Mama says, I found out Karl Marx was baptized Lutheran. I reviewed an excellent biography of Karl Marx on the book club some months ago. KMG should do Battleship Potemkin, says Chogokin 666. The saddest music in the world, another Madden fade. That would be the Canadian director, Guy Madden. Speaking of smile, I never understood the appeal of Melanie Griffith. She was certainly a cute young woman. I think she became very annoying, a very annoying actress as an adult. Annette O'Toole is in that movie, and oh my word, what a gorgeous woman. You know, it's a movie about a beauty pageant, and not all the contestants are beautiful, but they have a kind of a glow of youth that is pretty much completely gone from young women in Canada and America now. You know, they're not sullen and bitter and always complaining, and of course, their bodies are not disfigured with tattoos. And some good news from Austria, of all places. This is from uncoverdc.com. Michelle Edwards, Austrian MP Gerald Hauser recently posed demanding questions to the country's Minister of Health, Johannes Rauch, concerning liability surrounding the COVID-19 jabs. Rauch's responses indicate that the medical professionals who blindly followed the evidence-less assurances from the ministry that the shots were safe could very likely be held responsible in the event of vaccination damage. Specifically, the Minister of Health's answers shows doctors would be required to provide adequate information about possible dangers and harmful consequences of the injections in advance so individuals can make informed and free decisions. Too bad they didn't do that in the beginning before 90% or more of people were bullied into getting the jabs. If they failed to do so in Austria, medical professionals could face penalties of up to 14,000 euros. Informed consent. I recall reading something about that in the Nuremberg laws that followed World War II. Of course, one was a conspiratorialist to mention the Nuremberg laws in that respect, and somehow mentioning the Nuremberg laws and with respect to the jabs somehow made one anti-Semitic. Yeah, okay. Let's go to Steve Kirsch's newsletter. The safe and effective narrative is falling apart. Here's my list of 23 leading indicators that the momentum is moving in our favor. I'd be surprised if the narrative doesn't fall apart soon. It's now unraveling quickly in the UK. There's a piece by Richard Windsor in The Week. Non-COVID excess deaths, why are they rising? Experts call for probe as mortality rates in England and Wales climb despite drop in corona doom deaths. There is a 163% rise in life insurance claims at Lincoln National, which is the fifth largest insurance company in the U.S. Excess deaths are on the rise. Life insurance companies are reporting record numbers of excess deaths. These are not statistical fluctuations. England, excess deaths on the rise, but not because of coronavirus. Experts call for investigation. The overall shift in the causes of death is impossible to ignore. The vaccine injuries of toddlers who are now having seizures cannot be explained. This is now a daily occurrence for 2 and 3-year-old kids to have seizures. It's only happening in vaccinated kids, and most often between 2 and 5 days of vaccination from the COVID vaccine. Countries are starting to realize birth rates are dropping and there are more stillbirths. The deaths and injuries are happening in plain view of everyone with no plausible explanation for all the coincidences. All of the events are only happening to vaccinated people. And you can find the rest of this article at Steve Kirsch, that's KIRSCH, .substack.com. And we'll now go to Alex Berenson's Substack. And of course, Alex Berenson is back on Twitter. Hooray, hooray. And he writes, why the Berenson v. Twitter settlement may open the door to claims from other banned users. I can't talk about my settlement with Twitter beyond yesterday's 3-sentence statement. I take that obligation seriously. My lips are sealed. But I can talk about what the settlement may mean. And in other words, if Twitter's position is that it can ban anyone for any reason, fine. Section 230, at least as is now interpreted, allows that discretion. But once Twitter or any social media company voluntarily sets and disseminates guidelines that says it will follow in disciplining or banning users, it must follow those, even if its underlying terms of service explicitly say otherwise. So in other words, Alsop felt the emails from the Twitter vice president tied the knot around Twitter's ability to ban me, but the string was the 5-strike policy itself. Alsop was the judge. Now, here's the key for other banned users in settling the case, acknowledging error, and reinstating me. Twitter seems to have inherently and publicly accepted this theory of its contractual obligations, not just because of its specific representations to me, but for any user. Twitter has acknowledged that my tweets should not have led to my suspension at that time. In other words, in its own public statement, the little bird admitted that the tweets themselves, the content of the tweets, mattered. In other words, if you've been banned for COVID misinformation or any specific and named violation of Twitter's policies, and you have a plausible case that your tweets did not in fact violate those policies, you may now be able to bring a breach of contract case. The more granular your argument, the more you can argue that on a factual basis your statements were correct, the better chance you will have. Excuse me. And let's move on from that, and we're going to look at dailyskeptic.org. And I suppose there's some happiness there that Boris Johnson is gone. Of course, there's always a distinct possibility that whoever follows Boris Johnson as conservative leader is going to be even worse. And you may have seen this story about a 10-year-old rape victim. Hard cases make bad law, as the old saw has it, but this seems to be what drives policymaking these days. This is by J.D. Rucker at AmericaFirstReport.com. For the last few days, the story has been making its rounds across a multitude of corporate media and leftist outlets. The gist of the story is that a 10-year-old rape victim in Ohio was denied an abortion because she was 3 days late, so she had to go to Indiana to have the preborn baby killed. The story came out shortly after Roe v. Wade was overturned by the Supreme Court and has been fodder for leftist media ever since. But there are problems with the story. For once, I'm very hopeful that the fake news media fell for a story contrived by a radical leftist anti-life abortionist. If the story was made up, as journalist Megan Fox speculated about in a long Twitter thread, that's one fewer victim of the depraved sexual predators who lurk across America. Essential to Megan Fox's argument is that the police apparently were never involved. Now, doctors were involved, and doctors are obligated to refer such cases to the police. But a search of local media and national media shows no evidence that the police were involved. Megan Fox tweets, a pregnant 10-year-old is evidence of a heinous crime against a child, but in every article, and there are so many, there is no mention of criminal investigation, no police involvement, not even a town where this allegedly occurred. An unnamed alleged child abuse doctor called Dr. Caitlin Bernard, an abortionist in Indiana, asked for help. But any doctor who knows of abuse would be required to also call law enforcement. There should be a criminal investigation going involving Ohio DFS and police. Number 3, which maybe should be number 1, the timing of this horrific story is too on the nose. Roe v. Wade was just overturned. The media is desperate for stories to push the pro-abortion narrative, stoke fear, anger, and division. You know, in so many of these claims, which are used, they're used by adult women to buttress certain arguments. I long ago noticed that were the police involved? Did you call the police? Did they investigate your claim? If you didn't call the police, why didn't you call the police? If you believe that this horrific thing happened to you, wouldn't you want to spare other women from this? Also, what makes me suspicious is just the matter-of-fact tone that's used when making these claims. Autism, it's hip, it's hot, it's happening. Apparently, everyone wants to be on the spectrum. This is a Kathleen Stock at Unheard. There's nothing punk about autism. After months of staff allegations of toxic bullying at Scottish beer company Brewdog, the company's chief executive has finally explained the cause of his intense and demanding behavior. He suspects he has light-level autism. In an open letter published last week and signed by hundreds of staff, James Watt was accused of presiding over a rotten culture typified by a culture of fear, institutional misogyny, summary dismissals, illegal corner cutting, and health and safety breaches. Yet in a podcast broadcast this week, Watt said that he had 100% good intentions towards his staff and that his past behavior stemmed from being focused on success. At the same time, though, he suggested that a previously undiagnosed condition of autism might be partly responsible too, and said he was working with a specialist at the moment to see if there's a diagnosis there or not. There are a few peculiarities here, not least Watt's ability to make the difficulty of diagnosing autism sound rather like that of discovering subatomic particles in the Hadron Collider. To my knowledge, detection usually involves a relatively uncomplicated assessment readily available to someone of Watt's means. But perhaps when autism is only light level and compatible not just with running a billion-dollar company, but also with savvily evolving a brand that many consumers approach with the reverence of a cult, clear traces of autism are quite difficult for medical professionals to detect. In his 2015 book, Business for Punks, Break All the Rules the Brewdog Way, Watt, rather in contrast to the stereotype of the socially unaware, rule-following loner, tells readers that your biggest challenge from day one is to give people a reason to care, and that reason has got to be your mission. Figure out how to make people want to care about what you do. Under Watt's leadership, the company has proved very good at making customers care about their beer, creating a genuinely fervent fandom among its mostly male customers via various laddish marketing schemes. Their gonzo campaigns have included dropping taxidermied cats over London, dressing Watt and fellow founder up as prostitutes in a crowdfunding campaign, and offering free tattoos of the company logo to customers in return for 20% off the price of beer. I had never heard of Brewdog before today, but now that I know this, I'm determined that not a drop of it will ever pass my lips. There has also been the chance, apparently exciting to many, to attend the company's annual General Mayhem, otherwise known as the company AGM, proving at the very least that Brewdog are capable of organizing a piss-up in a brewery. Post-scandal, Watt has again apparently adjusted well, steering his company away from the metalheads and fans who think Dave is Britain's best TV channel towards a more sensitive image, suitable for these highly sensitive times. The company has ditched the private jet, gone carbon negative, launched a beer called #IamWhole, while telling customers it's okay to be sad AF, and committed to planting millions of trees, albeit that, according to a BBC documentary, the latter will be at the taxpayers' expense. Only last week, Brewdog announced that it will be launching the UK's largest pub at Waterloo Station, a place where, Watt says, you can record your own podcast, explore our hidden cocktail bar, or stoke some competition with a game of duckpin bowling or ping pong. Assuming that the targeted demographic for Brewdog is still mostly male, it seems safe to conclude from this alone that perceptions of masculinity have been on quite the journey in the last decade. And with these many markers of benign corduroy hipsterism proudly on display, it is perhaps not surprising that a self-exculpatory autism diagnosis has been thrown in for the CEO. Okay, the UK's largest pub, where you can record your own podcast. Pubs tend to be quite noisy places. I was at one last night, sitting even on the patio. It was quite noisy. How could one record a podcast in a place like that? The argument that Watt is making here, and we're going to see more and more people making this argument, is that you might call me an irrational jerk who finds enjoyment in other people's pain. That is bigotry. I am autistic. So that means I get to be as rude, as insensitive as I want, and you can't say a word against it. What a delightful future is in store for us. And what do university students, today's university students, need most? Well, apparently ways to get stupider. This is from Claire Marie Murkowski at LifeSite News. An international cannabis culture brand, Burb Cannabis Corp, has received permission to open a store at one of Canada's biggest universities, despite strong opposition from locals. Last month, Burb Cannabis Corp received final permission from the Metro Vancouver Regional District Board of Directors at the University of British Columbia to open a cannabis shop on campus. This was a big victory for us after a contentious debate around public safety and community fit, said John Kay, CEO and co-founder at Burb. He said, despite concerns grounded in age-old stigma from nearby residents, many of whom were offshore residential owners, the board made an informed decision that aligned with the overwhelming voice of the student body, as well as the tenets of legalization in our country. What this guy is saying, it's those nasty Chinese who do not want a marijuana store on the UBC campus. I'm just rather shocked that he got away with that. Apparently, in the hierarchy of values, weed is higher than race now, which makes it very high indeed. Let's take a look at the chat, and then I'll be talking about a culture. Strategically Adaptive Memeplex says, why not make customers care by making beer that they love the taste of and enjoy drinking? Yo Mama says, KMG, this is referred to as the Chris Chan argument. Dan says, a classroom full of Jeff Spicolis. One scene in a movie might have bits from 5 different takes. Oh, this is referring to stage acting versus screen acting. Hauper says, lots of stage actors look down on screen acting. It's not the high wire act being on stages. Like Glenn Gould, I'm not a fan of live performances. I mean, there's a car crash effect, you know. There's also straining for effect. I know it's possible to perform a piece of music, say classical music, subtly. There's almost an irresistible temptation to, as the kids like to say, pimp it out, which you don't have in the studio. Charles Grodin and Harry Dean Stanton. Ooh. They're in what movie? It features Dabney Coleman doing a funny impression of James Caan walking as Sidney Pollack, making a very interesting point on film acting. Oh, okay. A documentary about acting called A Character. Rauch is a good name, says Quachalang, considering that COVID is an aerosol and very similar to smoke. Rauch. Art Mob says late breakfast in the South Pacific, noonish at work, eggs and real bacon and tea. Of course, by real bacon, do you mean back bacon? Enron says, I recall Annette O'Toole fondly from 1-on-1. And Kevin not liking any kind of live performance is curious, says Ann Run. I don't, there's, the smell of the grease paint, the roar of the crowd. It annoys me that, let's say you watch an opera with a very sad ending, right? And then maybe a devastating ending. And then as soon as the last note has died out, everyone is expected to slap their paws together and not contemplate what they have just seen. And I'm thinking in particular of an opera by the French composer Francis Poulenc about the murder of nuns during the French Revolution. It's called Dialogue des Carmelites. It's a beautiful and very sad piece, and there is an acclaimed production of it by the German actress or former actress Martha Keller, and it's a very minimalist design, and I'm very taken with it. But again, it's nice to see the performers, being thanked for what they have done. But again, everyone's happy now. Well, I don't know. Maybe one should think about the questions that the opera raises, about the nature of religious faith and the nature of fanaticism. Yes, Chabalatarski quotes Bugs Bunny. What did you expect from an opera? A happy ending? I've had an incredibly annoying neighbor at pretty much every performance. Some just, brow rising, some totally outrageous. Hello to Half Galician. Well, there's, these people who have to say bravo, right? Shout bravo. Oh, because unless you shout bravo, you haven't really enjoyed the piece. The audience is what makes it difficult to enjoy live performance. As standards erode, so do audience members. I may have told this story before. I once attended a concert where Marilyn Horne was singing Mahler's Kindertotenlieder, songs on the death of children, which is an absolutely devastating suite of songs. And as Marilyn Horne was into the fifth and final song, some rich lady behind me decided she had to be ready to bolt out of the theater as soon as the last note died. And there she is, checking her purse. And do I have my keys? Yes, I have my keys. And all of this stuff. And it took all my willpower not to whip my head around and shout at her. Hello to Radayan Raskolnikov. And let's see. Okay. Now we're going to talk about culture, or the lack of it. We don't have culture anymore. We have consumption. Oh, did you know that the new MCU movie is the gayest one yet? That's from Natalie Portman, who's absolutely tickled pink by this development. Okay, so it's the gayest one yet, but is it any good? Mark Judge had his piece at American Greatness. Can Western cultural literacy make a comeback? In 2015, two events highlighted the state of Western culture today. The premiere of the film Star Wars: The Force Awakens and the publication of the book Notes on the Death of Culture, Essays on Spectacle and Society by Mario Vargas Llosa. Notes on the Death of Culture is a brilliant and challenging work that argues for the vital importance of high culture in human flourishing and the health of societies. Star Wars, The Force Awakens, is a piece of junk that serves as a prime example of the cultural collapse Losa describes in his autopsy. With amazing lucidity, Losa drives to the heart of a devastating problem in the West, the erosion of genuine culture. While culture can certainly encompass comic books, movies, and pop songs, I love all three, increasingly we have lost sight of an appreciation for the more complex and challenging works of art that can more deeply change us. Losa cites books by T.S. Eliot, James Joyce, Homer, and Nietzsche, works of art by Picasso, Rembrandt, and Seurat, and plays by Chekhov, O'Neill, Ibsen, and Brecht as examples of things that enriched to an extraordinary degree my imagination, my desires, and sensibility. I don't know, that's a pretty good list, except for Pablo Picasso. Yes, I know, as Jonathan Richman reminded us, that nobody ever called him an asshole, but his work is rubbish. He couldn't paint. Even Lavoie said, before Picasso and his ilk, it was understood that there were standards in art. With Picasso, it's all a question of whether you get it or not. And he said that is not the basis on which art is measured. But back to our essay. One thing all of these works have in common is the great effort involved in creating them and the effort it takes to consume them, at least if we are to truly understand them. Great works of culture should change who we are. They should also attempt to engage with complex cultural and spiritual issues. But with the democratization of culture, the digital revolution, and the elimination of middle and highbrow culture in favor of pop culture, this is all too rare. Losa argues, now we are all cultured in some way, even if we've never read a book, visited an art exhibition, listened to a concert, or acquired any basic idea of the humanistic, scientific, or technological knowledge in the world in which we live, unquote. Culture, in other words, becomes not something that you have to actively work at, even as that work is intensely rewarding and joyful, but something you passively consume. Losa continues, of course, culture can indeed be a pleasing pastime, but if it is just this, then the very concept becomes distorted and debased. Everything included under the term becomes equal and uniform. A Verdi opera, the philosophy of Kant, a concert by the Rolling Stones, and a performance by the Cirque du Soleil have equal value. The essayist continues, thus Star Wars becomes war and peace. There have always been pop culture entertainments that have captured a society's attention, from the circus to the Untouchables to Marvel's string of hit superhero movies. I don't come to bury pop culture. I love it, as I find deep metaphors in the music of Taylor Swift. Or an epic like The Dark Knight Returns. Losa is also no snob, admitting he loves movies and goes to them twice a week. Yet what has been lost in giving so much credence to pop culture and the acceptance of passive transmission over and against having to strive to acquire it is that willingness by cultural consumers to do any heavy lifting. Thus, we lose what we could gain by taking on more challenging works, such as Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov, Beethoven's Symphonies, A Love Supreme by John Coltrane, or James Joyce's Ulysses. Without that effort, and such anchoring in life-altering works, Losa argues, culture becomes adrift, feckless, and childish. Even George Lucas based the first Star Wars on a substantive work, Joseph Campbell's The Hero with a Thousand Faces. Kingsley Amis, there's a series of books which are collected in one volume, his various newspaper columns on the subject of drink and drinking. And he has a musing chapter about hangovers. And he suggests some unorthodox hangover cures, such as reading Solzhenitsyn's A Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, because that will teach you, as miserable as you are feeling right now, it is not nearly as miserable as this, was the life depicted in Ivan Denisovich, or listening to anything by John Coltrane. Yes, as hellish as life seems right now, it is not nearly as hellish as John Coltrane's music. The essayist continues, while Star Wars is treated as reality-shifting cultural phenomenon, most of the installments in the series are simply mediocre movies. Harrison Ford looks tired and silly reprising the role of Han Solo. There is no exposition or backstory to explain the character's motivations. The action is relentless, yet somehow boring. The destruction of yet another Death Star is particularly lazy. Our cultural muscles have become atrophied, allowing works of marginal value to be praised as high art. It's all become one big pop culture Death Star sequel, sucking everything into its mindless orbit. But we can resist. We can say no. We can learn to flex highbrow cultural muscles again and to take on challenging works of art. We can say Nicki Minaj is junk, James Patterson is a hack, and Lady Gaga produces lazy provocations, not art. We could even say that Star Wars The Force Awakens is cotton candy that is forgotten seconds after you leave the theater. Perhaps then we can get back to what Loza sees as the truest, noblest calling of culture, nourishing our souls while examining the big questions. Loza's critique offers a challenge and a warning. The raison d'etre of culture was to give an answer to these big questions. Today, it is exonerated from such a responsibility since we have turned it into something much more superficial and voluble, a form of entertainment or an esoteric or obscurantist game for self-regarding academics and intellectuals who turn their backs on society. And one last thing I wanted to talk about, I guess it's a return to the alliance between the left and corporations. It's an essay by Paul Kingsnorth in Unheard called How the Left Fell for Capitalism. Progressives were always part of the corporate elite. What may turn out to be the biggest political movement of the 21st century emerged from the rainforest remnants of southern Mexico on January the 1st, 1994. And he is talking about the Chiapas rebellion. And he admires their struggle. Mexico does not like to admit that it is ruled by a tiny minority, 8 or 9% of the population, who are, well, white and do not have any Indian blood. And they oppress everyone else in Mexico, even as they damn their founder, Hernan Cortes. Who's he? Oh, very bad, very, very bad man. Well, if not for Cortes, there would be no Mexico as we know it. He writes that his description of the Chiapas Rebellion was from his very first book, One No, Many Yeses, an account of the first wave of anti-globalization protests, which was published 19 years ago. Back then, excitable young anti-capitalist that I was, I believed that I was part of a worldwide mass movement, which was rising up against the colonization of the world's economies and cultures by an unaccountable corporate elite. Since at least the end of the Cold War, the declared aim of the Western powers has been the spread of a global market economy, combined with a liberal politics and culture to every benighted corner of the earth. Since a globalized market can't function without globalized tastes, you can't sell your cheap burgers to Asia until you've convinced Asians that they're loving it. And since liberalism also needs an appropriate soil to seed in, the momentum of this ideological crusade is towards the creation of one global culture, whether the world wants it or not. This threefold rollout, global economy, global culture, and global political system, all of them based on the American model, has long been referred to with the bland moniker globalization, or globalism, if you prefer. In reality, it is a form of soft colonialism, the latest iteration of Western empire, and a hugely successful one. Back in the late 90s, the anti-globalization movement that rose up in opposition to this process was a political melting pot of anarchism, localism, indigenous perspectives, radical environmentalism, liberal commitments to democracy, and various other strands, all of it uncoordinated and fervently anti-hierarchical. It was a mess, but it was an exciting mess. And though a lot of people involved, including me, were allergic to labels and boxes, there was no doubt that this was a movement of the left. Though wrong about plenty of things, the left has traditionally been correct about the negative impacts of global capitalism, while the right has floundered about denying its impacts on the poor, on democracy, and on nature, generally valorizing greed and rapine, and then wondering where the traditional values they love so much has gone. You wouldn't have found any conservatives on the barricades at the anti-WTO protests. Most of them were either inside hymning the virtues of free trade, or back in Washington or London ginning up the next Middle East war. How times have changed. Here in the 2020s, the left anti-globalism that I once thought was the movement of the future is barely in evidence anywhere. The most incisive opponents of corporate globalization today are often to be found on the right, or at least not from any identifiable sector of the left. Conservative, traditionalist, and post-liberal critiques of the impact of globalization on local communities, nation-states, social cohesion, family formation, working-class prospects, culture, and even, though not often enough, the natural world are pouring out daily. The post-working class left, meanwhile, has veered into an identity politics cul-de-sac, dictated largely by its commitment to an elite class war and an obsessive pursuit of cultural inversion. The worldview that the academic Eric Kaufmann calls left modernism is now the outlook of the professional managerial classes, the top 10% or so of society, and, not coincidentally, the beneficiary class of globalization. Via transnational corporations, the academic and cultural sectors, NGOs, global and regional bodies, and other collectives of usually unaccountable power, this class is rolling out the threefold ideology of globalism within their own nations and beyond. Meanwhile, a national populist movement built largely around a working and lower middle class reaction to this ideology is coalescing around calls for national self-determination, some degree of cultural conservatism, economic protection, and democratic accountability. On the face of it, this is confusing. Well, why would transnational capital be parroting slogans drawn from a leftist framework which claims to be anti-capitalist? Why would the middle classes be further to the left than the workers? If the left was what it claims to be, a bottom-up movement for popular justice, this would not be the case. If capitalism was what it was assumed to be, a rapacious, non-ideological engine of profit maximization, then this would not be the case. Paul Kingsnorth continues, but what if both of them were something else? What if the ideology of the corporate world and the ideology of the progressive left had not forged an inexplicable marriage of convenience, but had grown all along from the same rootstock? What if the left and global capitalism are at base the same things, engines for destroying customary ways of living and replacing them with the globalized universalist technological matrix that is currently rising around us? We are living through a time of radical flattening as this emerging global system, which I like to call the machine, rapidly replaces previous ways of being with a new and novel global civilization. Emerging from the Industrial Revolution and the dislocations of modernity's revolutions, this machine is now engaged in a project of deconstructing both human nature and wild nature, replacing them with a borderless world of etoliated, rational individuals, each of them equal participants in a global marketplace governed by algorithms, profit, and dreams of universal oneness. With the possible exception of the bit about the marketplace, this is also a good description of the project of the political left. The very notion of a left was birthed with modernity. The term comes from the seating arrangement of the anti-monarchy faction of the French Assembly after the Revolution. Despite much self-mythologizing, leftist ideology has always been primarily a product of urban intellectuals and middle-class radicals pursuing a project of theoretical leveling. This leveling always begins with the destruction of previous lifeways. Mao's Four Olds, the Bolshevik project to eliminate the bourgeois family, currently being resurrected by some on the contemporary left, French revolutionary attempts to rationalize the landscape, the current progressive push to transition children. But what if it ends up doing is clearing the ground for the machine? Progressive leftism and global capitalism, far from being antagonistic as some of us once thought, have turned out to be a usefully snug fit. Both are totalizing utopian projects. Both are suspicious of the past, impatient with borders and boundaries, and hostile to religion, so-called superstition, and the limits on the human individual imposed by nature or culture. Both are in pursuit of a global utopia where, in the dreams of both Lenin and John Lennon, the world will live as one. If the past 40 years have taught us anything, it's that dreams of universal equality can segue very easily into dreams of universal market access. There's a reason that both progressives and The Economist magazine champion open borders. There's a reason so many hippies ended up as tech billionaires. If you have ever asked yourself what kind of revolution would be sponsored by Nike, promoted by BP, propagandized for by Hollywood and Netflix, and policed by Facebook and YouTube, then the answer is here. In the roiling breakdown of the 2020s, progressive leftism and corporate capitalism have not so much merged as been exposed for what they always were. Variants of the same modern ideal built around the pursuit of boundless self-creation in a post-natural world. The Canadian Red Tory philosopher George Grant once observed, quote, The directors of General Motors and the followers of Professor Marcuse will sail down the same river in different boats, unquote. These days, they have abandoned their separate vessels and are sailing downstream in a super yacht together, while the rest of us gawp or throw rocks from the banks. Perhaps we could say that the leveling instinct is the West's gift to the world. It's a complicated offering, to be sure, but at its noblest, it is one to be proud of. Without some levelers around, a culture is in danger of becoming ossified, abusive, and top-heavy. Power always needs to be kept on its toes. Leaders and systems should always be prepared to justify their existence. But what happens when leveling is the only instinct left? When the culture is so empty, so purposeless, so uprooted that it has forgotten how to do anything but deconstruct itself? More to the point, what happens when leveling is the instinct not of the poor, but of power? What happens when the destruction of borders, limits, and boundaries benefits big tech, big money, and those who drink from their spigot, rather than the small voices left thirsting in the fields? And what happens when big money uses the language of the small voices, the language of leveling, to tie up its work in pretty bows? This is where we are. The postmodern left, which has seized the heights of so much of Western culture, is not some radical threat to the establishment. It is the establishment. Progressive leftism is market liberalism by other means. The left and corporate capitalism now function like a pincer. One attacks the culture, deconstructing everything from history to so-called heteronormativity to national identities. The other moves in to monetize the resulting fragments. Where then to stand? Could there be a left without progress? Could there be a right without capitalism? Perhaps. But we first need to come to terms with the radicalism of times we're living through. This is a time in which the pertinent questions are not who should own the means of production or should we privatize the health service. They are, what is a woman? Where should we implant the microchips? How quickly can we get this digital ID system up and running? And what do you think of my new killer robot? The creation of designer babies, the abolition of the sexed body, the growing of brains in labs, whatever you want, the machine can provide it, technology can fashion it, and progressive ideology can define it as justice. When people ask me where I stand, I say these days it's with an older tradition, the same one I was writing about in my first book, although I didn't know it then. It's a tradition I saw represented in what the Zapatistas did in the 1990s, and I've heard its echo in historical uprisings in my own country, from the Luddites to the Fen Tigers. It's a tradition which takes a stand not according to ideological positioning, but according to actual positioning on earth, under the sky, surrounded by people who know where the sun rises in the morning, where they come from, and who they are. It's a tradition we could call reactionary radicalism, resisting the machine's totalizing force from a perspective rooted in the 3 Ps: people, place, and prayer. Neither left nor right nor anywhere else. It's a tradition that crosses all the modern divides because it is older than all of them. It digs down literally to the root of the matter. It is the dream of a localized populist opposition to gigantic, destructive modernity in all its forms. And again, this is an essay called How the Left Fell for Capitalism by Paul Kingsnorth at unheard.com. So final look at the chat. If you haven't seen it, check out Michael Caine on screen versus stage acting, says Halper. And I remember Stanton saying that anybody can act, like Brando has also said. I just, when you mentioned Michael Caine talking about acting, there's a hilarious bit by Peter Serafinovich on his TV show. You can find this on YouTube, where actors talking about their craft and just this impersonation of Michael Caine. Oh, and stealing scenes by inserting yourself in shots. It's just absolutely hilarious. But the best is Kevin Spacey, where he asks a woman to act before him, to play out a scene, and he makes her just tortuously go through, oh, now you're knocking on my door. Who's your agent? Calling up the agent. Oh, there's no such agency. This is a laundry. You shouldn't lie, he says. And then she does her bit, and he starts yelling at her and practically reducing her to tears. And then he says, don't worry about it. I just don't like women. Uh, uh, Anron says, Kevin, Sidney Pollack makes the case in character. There is no such thing as performance in movies. It is all rehearsal because the director can always ask for one more take. He can only use what he's given. You know, Kubrick was notorious for take after take after take after take, and he said there's a reason for this. And the first reason is that actors don't learn their lines anymore. Oh, no, I can just improvise. Oh, well, if you could come up with something better than what's in the script, Kubrick would write it down and then type it up and incorporate it. If you can't come up with something better that is in the script, just say your lines. But since and even if they know their lines, they only half know them. They haven't internalized them. So they're quite tentative in early takes. Thank you for your kind words, Art Mob. Jay Boss says, acting is the most minor of gifts after all. Shirley Temple could do it when she was 4, said Catherine Hepburn. Anran responds, she couldn't have played Hamlet or Ophelia. Quechalango says, KMG show chat is the equivalent of one good game. Good night, guys and dolls. Why do they all whisper? Demands Gamion. Whispering is not acting. Someone should ask the President of the United States this. I see, I see him in public and he starts talking like this. And I'm thinking, how is it the audience is not completely creeped out by this? Halper says the kid in Bicycle Thieves gave one of the best performances I've seen. That is outstanding movie. And I like the way it ends. It's ambivalent ending. I won't spoil the ending for people who haven't seen it. Shogun 666 says, I'm amused by your earnestness phase. Okay. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I shall be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you'd like to make a donation to the live stream, my PayPal account is linked to kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you're in Canada, donations may be made directly to the live stream via interact@kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection to ease the burden. Good night.